At least the shrew finally looks as old as she acts, my daughter-in-law whispered to her friends while laughing over glasses of white wine on my back patio. A second later, I heard my own son laugh with them. I stood frozen behind the sliding glass door, one hand still clutching the ceramic pitcher of iced tea I had carried outside for everyone. For a moment, I honestly thought maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe the medication had made me dizzy again. Maybe the exhaustion from chemotherapy was playing tricks on me. But then Vanessa laughed louder and said, "Honestly, losing her hair did more for her appearance than Botox ever could." The women around her burst into giggles. Ethan lowered his head into his wineglass, smiling like a man too weak to stop what was happening but too comfortable to leave. My chest tightened so suddenly I had to steady myself against the wall. 3 months earlier, I had been diagnosed with stage 2 ovarian cancer. Before that, I had been the woman who hosted Thanksgiving every year for nearly 3 decades. The woman who remembered every birthday in the family. The woman who baked cinnamon rolls from scratch on Christmas morning, because Ethan loved them as a little boy. Now I was apparently entertainment for women wearing diamond bracelets and spray tans in my own backyard. I quietly placed the pitcher down on the kitchen counter before anyone noticed me standing there. My reflection caught briefly in the dark microwave door. The silk scarf tied around my head suddenly looked ridiculous to me. Fragile. Performative. I had spent nearly 40 minutes that afternoon learning how to wrap it properly from a YouTube tutorial, because Vanessa once casually mentioned that women who let themselves go during treatment look depressing. I remember staring at my reflection and thinking how strange it was that illness could make you disappear before you were even gone. The house smelled faintly like grilled salmon and lemon candles. Vanessa had insisted on hosting a small recovery dinner for me after my second chemo session. She posted photos online before guests even arrived. In every picture, she stood beside me smiling softly with captions about family strength and resilience. Hundreds of comments poured in calling her an angel, a devoted daughter-in-law, a blessing. Meanwhile, she had spent the entire week complaining about driving me to appointments and asking Ethan whether all this treatment was even worth it at her age. I slowly untied the scarf from my head and folded it carefully on the kitchen island. My scalp felt cold under the air conditioning vent above me. Outside, laughter continued drifting through the screen door like music from another life. Vanessa was now telling her friends how hard it was taking care of someone so emotional all the time. Emotional. I hadn't cried once in front of her. Not when my hair started falling out in silver clumps across my pillowcase. Not when the doctor explained the surgery. Not even when Ethan forgot to pick up my medication because Vanessa wanted him at some rooftop restaurant downtown. I simply adapted. Quietly. Like women my age were taught to do. I walked upstairs to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed Richard and I had shared for 41 years before he passed away from a heart attack. His side of the mattress still remained untouched. Some habits survive grief. On the nightstand sat the framed photo from our trip to Bar Harbor, Maine 10 summers ago. In the picture, I was laughing into the wind while Richard held my hand near the water. My hair had been thick then. Long and silver blonde. Richard used to call it my movie star hair. I stared at that photograph for a long time before finally whispering something aloud for the first time since my diagnosis. Cancer isn't what made me feel ugly. Downstairs, another burst of laughter echoed through the house I once believed was filled with family. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise to the sound of rain tapping softly against the bedroom windows. For a few seconds I forgot everything. The diagnosis. The dinner. The laughter outside the glass door. I simply stared at the ceiling beneath Richard's old ceiling fan, listening to its slow familiar hum. Then my hand brushed against my bare scalp, and reality settled over me again like cold fog. I sat up carefully and reached for the knit cap folded on my nightstand, but halfway through putting it on I stopped. The room was empty. There was no reason to cover myself. I lowered the cap back onto the table and walked quietly downstairs barefoot, one hand trailing along the wooden banister Richard had refinished himself nearly 20 years earlier. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and expensive perfume. Vanessa was already awake. I heard her voice before I entered the room. "I am serious, Melissa. If she keeps acting fragile, Ethan is going to postpone the Aspen trip again." She paused, listening. "Exactly. It is like the entire family revolves around medical appointments now. I remained still in the hallway for a moment, hidden from view. The refrigerator light reflected softly across the marble countertops Vanessa insisted on installing after Richard died. She said the old kitchen looked outdated. Richard loved that kitchen. He used to dance with me beside the stove while spaghetti sauce simmered on Sunday evenings. Now everything looked polished and cold, like a showroom nobody actually lived in. Vanessa finally noticed me standing there and instantly changed her expression. It was remarkable how quickly she transformed. Her voice softened. Her shoulders relaxed. "Margaret, you are up early," she said warmly while ending the call. "I was just about to make you oatmeal. The doctor said soft foods would probably feel better after treatment." I nodded politely and moved toward the coffee machine. "Thank you." She watched me carefully while stirring almond milk into a saucepan. "You should really try resting more today. You looked tired last night." Tired. That was the word people used when they wanted to avoid saying sick, weak, dying. I poured myself coffee and noticed my hands trembling slightly against the ceramic mug. Not from illness. From restraint. Ethan wandered downstairs 20 minutes later still wearing sweatpants and scrolling through his phone. "Morning, Mom," he mumbled distractedly before kissing Vanessa on the cheek. He did not ask how I felt. He did not mention what happened outside the patio door. He simply opened the refrigerator and complained about somebody at work. Canceling a meeting. I watched him while steam curled from my coffee cup between us. Sometimes grief arrives long before somebody actually leaves your life. "Oh, before I forget," Vanessa said brightly while spooning berries into a bowl, "the photographer is coming by around 2 this afternoon." I frowned slightly. "Photographer?" "For the charity newsletter," she explained. "The women from the country club organized a feature about families supporting loved ones through cancer." She smiled proudly. People really connected with my posts online. My posts. Not our experience. Not my treatment. Her posts. Ethan finally looked up from his phone. "The fundraiser already raised almost $12,000, he said. "That is amazing, babe." "Babe." He sounded genuinely impressed. Vanessa touched his arm gently and lowered her voice. "I just want your mother to feel supported through all of this." I stared down into my coffee cup because I no longer trusted my face to remain calm. Outside, the rain had started falling harder against the windows. I remembered another rainy morning almost 15 years earlier when Ethan called me crying because Vanessa had broken up with him during college. I drove nearly 90 miles through a thunderstorm just to sit beside him in his tiny apartment and tell him heartbreak would pass. Back then he still reached for me when life hurt. Now he barely looked at me while another woman used my illness like a social accessory. After breakfast, Vanessa left for Pilates wearing white sneakers that probably cost more than my monthly prescription bill. Ethan disappeared into his home office upstairs. The house became quiet again. I carried my coffee into the den where Richard's old leather recliner still sat beside the fireplace. The cushion remained slightly sunken on one side from years of use. I lowered myself into it slowly and glanced toward the bookshelf beside the window. That was when I noticed something unusual. Richard's watchbox was sitting open. The watchbox was made of dark walnut with brass hinges Richard polished every Christmas. For nearly 2 years after his death, I had not touched it. Some grief becomes part of the furniture. You learn to walk around it quietly. I set my coffee down beside the recliner and reached for the box with slow, careful hands. Inside sat Richard's silver Omega watch, the one he wore every day for almost 30 years while teaching high school history. The leather strap was cracked near the buckle from use. Beneath the watch rested a folded piece of paper I had never seen before. My name was written across the front in Richard's unmistakable handwriting. Margaret. Just seeing his handwriting again tightened something deep in my chest. I unfolded the paper carefully. The note was short. If illness ever makes you dependent on others, pay attention to who becomes excited by your weakness. I read the sentence 3 times. Outside, thunder rolled softly through the gray afternoon sky. The house suddenly felt colder around me. Richard had always noticed things before I did. He used to say kindness sometimes made me blind. I remembered one Thanksgiving years ago when Vanessa first joined our family. She had laughed at one of Ethan's stories while secretly rolling her eyes the moment he looked away. Nobody else noticed except Richard. Later that night while washing dishes together, he quietly said, "That girl knows how to perform affection." I told him he was being unfair. Vanessa was young, stylish, ambitious, different from the women of our generation. I defended her for years after that. When she forgot my birthday but posted expensive gifts from Ethan online. When she complained about helping me after Richard's funeral because she had spa reservations. When she criticized my clothes, my cooking, even the way I decorated the house. I kept excusing it because I believed families survived by overlooking flaws. Now I wondered how many things Richard saw that I refused to see. My phone buzzed softly beside the recliner. A text from Claire Benson appeared on the screen. Saw the fundraiser photos online. Are you all right? Claire and I had been friends since sophomore year of high school in Hartford. She was one of the few people who still spoke to me honestly. I stared at the message for a moment before replying. Some days are stranger than others. 3 dots immediately appeared on the screen. Then another message arrived. I need to tell you something, Margaret. Can I come by later? A strange heaviness settled into my stomach. Claire rarely sounded uncertain about anything. Of course, I wrote back. Upstairs, I heard Ethan walking across the hallway floor toward his office. His footsteps sounded rushed, distracted. Somewhere along the way, my son had become a man permanently in a hurry. Too busy for long dinners. Too busy for conversations. Too busy to notice when his own mother stopped smiling. Around 2 o'clock, the photographer arrived. Vanessa transformed instantly the second the doorbell rang. She touched up her makeup in the hallway mirror and changed into a cream-colored cashmere sweater that made her look softer on camera. Margaret, she called sweetly. The photographer wants a few candid shots in the living room near the fireplace. Candid. I almost laughed at the word. Nothing about Vanessa was candid. I walked slowly into the living room wearing a pale blue cardigan and pearl earrings Richard gave me on our 40th anniversary. The young photographer smiled kindly at me while adjusting his camera lens. You have a beautiful home, he said politely. Thank you, I answered quietly. Vanessa immediately wrapped one arm around my shoulders for the photographs. We have all become so much closer through this journey, she said warmly to the camera. Journey. Another polished word people use when they want illness to sound inspirational instead of exhausting. Flash after flash lit up the room. Vanessa tilted her head sympathetically beside mine in every photo. Devoted. Elegant. Caring. I sat there smiling faintly while something inside me slowly hardened into clarity. Claire arrived just after 5 carrying a paper bag from the little bakery downtown that Richard used to love. The rain had stopped by then, leaving the windows streaked silver beneath the fading evening light. I opened the front door slowly, and the moment Claire saw my face, her expression changed. Not pity. Something sharper. Concern mixed with anger. You look tired, she said softly while stepping inside. I am tired, I answered. Honestly. Vanessa was upstairs getting ready for another charity dinner at the country club. I could hear cabinet doors opening and closing in the guest bathroom, while music drifted faintly through the ceiling vents. Claire glanced upward briefly before lowering her voice. Good. Then she is distracted. I led her into the den where Richard's recliner still faced the fireplace. Claire sat beside me on the couch and placed the bakery bag carefully on the coffee table between us. Blueberry scones, she said quietly. You used to eat these after parent-teacher conferences when we were exhausted. For the first time all day, I almost smiled. Claire removed her coat slowly, smoothing invisible wrinkles from the sleeves the way she always did when nervous. Margaret, she began carefully, I did not want to tell you this while you were going through treatment unless I was certain. My stomach tightened immediately. Certain of what? She hesitated just long enough to make me dread the answer. Last Friday, I was at Oak Ridge Country Club with my sister. Oak Ridge was where Vanessa spent most afternoons networking over salads and cocktails with women who called each other sweetheart, while quietly competing over handbags and husbands. Claire folded her hands together tightly. Vanessa was there with 3 women from the fundraising committee. I stared at the untouched fireplace logs while she spoke. I was seated 2 tables behind them. At first I was not really listening. She paused. Then I heard your name. Upstairs, a burst of laughter echoed faintly through the ceiling. Vanessa again. Bright. Effortless. Claire continued quietly. One of the women asked how you were handling treatment. Vanessa laughed and said, "Honestly, once someone her age gets sick, everything starts moving faster anyway. Ethan and I are just trying to prepare ourselves." My fingers tightened around the edge of the couch cushion. Claire looked sick repeating it. Then another woman joked about what would happen to the house. She swallowed hard before continuing. Vanessa said she was already looking into renovations because she wanted to tear out your library and turn it into a wine room. After, she stopped herself. She did not need to finish the sentence. Silence settled heavily between us. Somewhere upstairs, I heard Vanessa walking across hardwood floors in high heels. Click, click, click. The sound suddenly reminded me of someone pacing through property they already believed belonged to them. Claire reached across the couch and touched my hand gently. "Margaret, I am sorry." I looked down at our hands together. Mine thin and spotted with age. Hers steady and warm. "No," I said quietly after a long moment. "Do not apologize for telling me the truth." Claire exhaled slowly like she had been holding her breath all afternoon. "There is something else." I lifted my eyes toward her again. "Vanessa has been asking people questions about trusts and property transfers. One of the women on the committee said Vanessa joked that illness was terrible emotionally but very clarifying financially. Financially. The word landed colder than the others somehow. Not because it surprised me anymore. Because it explained everything. The staged photographs. The exaggerated concern online. The carefully rehearsed sympathy in public. Vanessa was not grieving my illness. She was managing an investment. Upstairs, footsteps crossed the hallway again before descending toward the staircase. Claire squeezed my hand once more before pulling away. "I know this is hard to hear." I slowly leaned back against the couch cushions and glanced toward Richard's watchbox sitting across the room beside the recliner. "Pay attention to who becomes excited by your weakness." For the first time since my diagnosis, I finally understood exactly what he meant. That night after Claire left, I sat alone in the den long after the rest of the house went quiet. Vanessa and Ethan had returned from their dinner around 10:30 carrying expensive shopping bags and smelling faintly of wine and perfume. Vanessa peeked into the den with practiced concern when they came home. "You should really be sleeping more," she said softly. "Your body needs rest right now." I looked up from Richard's watchbox resting in my lap and smiled politely. "I was just thinking." She nodded sympathetically, but her eyes drifted toward the bookshelf behind me where framed family photographs still lined the walls. I noticed then how often she looked at this house now. Not like a guest. Like someone mentally rearranging furniture before ownership papers were signed. Ethan barely stopped walking long enough to say goodnight before disappearing upstairs behind her. Their bedroom door closed. Silence followed. I remained downstairs another hour listening to the old grandfather clock tick steadily near the staircase. Richard bought that clock at an estate sale during our first year of marriage. He spent an entire winter repairing it piece by piece in the garage while Ethan sat nearby building model airplanes. Back then our home felt warm in a way that had nothing to do with money. Nobody cared about countertops or trust funds or social status. We simply belonged to one another. Around midnight, I finally carried the watchbox upstairs to my bedroom. The hallway mirror caught my reflection as I passed. Pale skin, hollow cheeks, bare scalp beneath soft lamplight. For months, I had avoided mirrors whenever possible. Not because I feared looking sick. Because I feared looking diminished. Vanessa had a talent for making weakness feel embarrassing. Suddenly I realized something unsettling. My illness was not what had been shrinking me. Her cruelty was. I sat carefully at my vanity and opened the bottom drawer where Richard kept important documents organized in labeled folders. Insurance papers. Tax records. Property deeds. Richard believed paperwork should always be neat enough for someone grieving to understand. As I sorted through the folders quietly, one envelope immediately caught my attention. Whitmore Family Trust. I stared at it for several seconds before opening it. Richard and I established the trust years earlier after Ethan got married. At the time, Richard insisted it was responsible planning. I remembered arguing with him in this very room because I thought legal documents created distance inside families. "Love should be enough," I told him once. Richard kissed my forehead and answered gently, "Love is wonderful, Maggie, But paperwork protects people when love changes. Did not understand him then. I understood him now. I spent nearly an hour reading every page beneath the soft yellow glow of my bedside lamp. The trust named Ethan as co-manager if I became medically incapacitated. Vanessa was not directly included, but through Ethan she would eventually control nearly everything. The house, the investments, Richard's retirement accounts, even the little cottage in Maine we bought after Ethan left for college. I closed the folder slowly while a strange calm settled over me. Not panic. Not heartbreak. Clarity. Downstairs, I suddenly heard soft footsteps moving through the kitchen. A cabinet door opened quietly. Then another. I crossed the bedroom and opened my door just enough to peer into the hallway. Light spilled upward from below. Vanessa's voice floated faintly through the staircase. "No, she has not changed anything yet," she whispered. A pause. "Trust me, Ethan avoids financial conversations completely." Another pause. Then a soft laugh. "Honestly, once the treatments get harder, she will probably sign whatever we put in front of her." My hand tightened against the bedroom doorframe so hard my knuckles ached. Vanessa continued speaking quietly downstairs while the grandfather clock ticked through the darkness beneath her voice. I listened to every word without making a sound, and for the first time since my diagnosis, I stopped feeling afraid of losing my life. I started becoming afraid of leaving my life in the wrong hands. The next morning, I scheduled an appointment with Richard's attorney before anyone else in the house woke up. Harold Bennett had handled our finances for over 25 years. He attended Ethan's graduation party. He stood beside me at Richard's funeral. More importantly, Harold was one of the few people Richard trusted completely. I made the call quietly from my bedroom while pale morning sunlight slipped through the curtains. "Margaret." Harold sounded genuinely surprised to hear from me so early. "Is everything all right?" I glanced toward the hallway before answering. "No," I said softly, "but I believe it needs to be." He did not ask questions over the phone. That was one thing I always appreciated about Harold Bennett. Some people perform concern. Others simply show up when needed. He offered me an appointment at 11:30. I told Vanessa I had a follow-up appointment with my oncologist downtown. Her reaction was immediate and theatrical. "Oh, sweetheart, you should have told me sooner. I could have rearranged my day and gone with you." I almost admired how naturally the lies came to her. "That is all right," I answered while buttering toast at the kitchen island. "I would rather go alone today." Ethan barely looked up from his phone. "Let us know what the doctor says," he muttered distractedly. I watched him carefully for a moment. My son had inherited Richard's eyes but none of his steadiness. Richard noticed discomfort and walked toward it. Ethan spent most of his life avoiding it entirely. By 11 o'clock, I was driving downtown beneath clear blue Connecticut skies with the windows cracked slightly open. It was the first time in weeks I had left the house alone. The freedom felt unfamiliar, almost guilty. During treatment, everyone begins speaking to you like fragile glass. Sit carefully. Rest more. Do not overexert yourself. Somewhere along the way, people stop asking what you want and start deciding what you can handle. Harold's office occupied the third floor of an old brick building overlooking Main Street. The waiting room smelled faintly of coffee and old books. When Harold stepped into the lobby and saw me without my scarf, his expression softened briefly before he recovered himself professionally. "Margaret," he said warmly while shaking my hand, "you look stronger than I expected." The sentence almost made me laugh. Strength had very little to do with appearance. Once seated inside his office, I placed the trust documents carefully on the desk between us. Harold adjusted his glasses and studied me quietly for a moment. "Tell me what is happening," he said. So I did. Not dramatically, not emotionally. I simply laid the facts out one by one like stones across a table. Vanessa's comments, the photographs, the phone calls, the discussions about the house, Ethan's silence. Harold listened without interrupting once. By the time I finished speaking, the room felt very still. Finally, he leaned back slowly in his chair and folded his hands together. "Richard worried about this possibility," he admitted quietly. My chest tightened slightly. "He did." Harold nodded. "Several years ago, He asked me to create alternate trust provisions in case you ever felt pressured or manipulated after his death. I stared at him in stunned silence. Richard really had seen everything long before I did. Harold opened a locked drawer and removed a thin blue folder. These documents were never activated, he explained calmly. Only you can decide that. I opened the folder carefully. Revised ownership structures. New medical protections. Charitable allocations. Conditions limiting financial control if coercion or exploitation became concerns. My hands rested quietly against the papers while sunlight warmed the edge of Harold's desk beside me. For the first time in months, I did not feel sick. I felt awake. Harold studied my expression carefully. What would you like to do, Margaret? I thought about Vanessa standing in my kitchen discussing renovations before I was even gone. I thought about Ethan laughing softly while his wife mocked my illness on the patio. Most of all, I thought about Richard's note hidden beneath his watch. Pay attention to who becomes excited by your weakness. I lifted my eyes toward Harold steadily. I would like to make sure my husband's life work ends up in the hands of people who still understand what family means. 3 days later, Vanessa hosted what she proudly called my celebration of strength dinner at Oak Ridge Country Club. She spent the entire week planning floral arrangements, coordinating photographers, and posting emotional updates online about resilience and family support. Every photograph featured her holding my hand or adjusting my chair with carefully rehearsed tenderness. Comments flooded beneath each post calling her inspirational, selfless, graceful under pressure. I stopped reading them after the first night. The dinner took place in the club's private ballroom overlooking the golf course. White roses covered the tables. Gold candles flickered softly against crystal glasses. Near the entrance stood a giant welcome sign in elegant script that read, "Honoring Margaret Whitmore's brave journey." Journey again. Everyone always called it a journey when they did not have to live inside the fear themselves. Vanessa wore a pale champagne-colored dress and moved around the room greeting guests like a politician during a campaign fundraiser. Every few minutes, she touched my shoulder gently or leaned down to ask if I needed anything while people watched. The performance was flawless. Ethan stayed close beside her most of the evening carrying drinks and thanking guests for their support. I noticed how naturally they worked together now, like business partners managing a public image. Claire arrived 20 minutes late and immediately squeezed my hand beneath the table without saying a word. That simple gesture grounded me more than anything else in the room. By 7:30, nearly 50 people filled the ballroom. Women from the charity committee mingled beside the bar discussing vacations and real estate while soft jazz music drifted through hidden speakers overhead. Across the room, I noticed 2 women whispering while glancing toward my head. One of them quickly looked away when our eyes met. I touched the edge of my wig instinctively. Vanessa insisted I wear it tonight because she said people would feel more comfortable seeing me look like myself again. Like myself. I spent almost an hour putting it on carefully that afternoon while staring into the vanity mirror. The synthetic blonde curls resembled my old hairstyle enough to fool strangers from a distance. But underneath it, my scalp itched constantly. Artificial hair trapping warmth against fragile skin. Artificial comfort for artificial people. Halfway through dinner, Vanessa tapped her champagne glass lightly with a spoon to gather attention. The room quieted almost immediately. Before dessert, she announced warmly, "I just want to say how deeply emotional this experience has been for our family." Her voice cracked at exactly the right moment. Watching someone you love go through illness changes your entire perspective on life. Several women nodded. Sympathetically, Vanessa placed one hand dramatically against her chest. "Margaret has taught all of us what strength really looks like." I looked around the ballroom slowly while polite applause filled the room. Strength. They kept using that word while treating me like fragile porcelain behind closed doors. Vanessa smiled toward me beautifully beneath the candlelight. "Would you like to say something?" she asked sweetly into the microphone. For a moment, the room blurred slightly around the edges. Not from illness. From clarity. I rose slowly from my chair while dozens of faces turned toward me expectantly. The wig suddenly felt unbearably heavy against my scalp. I reached both hands upward calmly and removed it in complete silence. Gasps spread softly through the ballroom like wind moving through leaves. Vanessa's smile disappeared instantly. I placed the wig carefully on the table beside my untouched dessert plate before lifting my eyes toward the room again. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the musicians had stopped playing. Cancer took my hair, I said quietly into the silence. But greed takes something far more important. Across the room, Vanessa stood perfectly still beside the glowing welcome sign, while every person in that ballroom slowly turned to look at her. The silence after my words felt heavier than any applause ever could. Nobody in that ballroom seemed to know where to look. Some stared at their wine glasses. Others shifted awkwardly in their chairs. Vanessa remained frozen beside the welcome sign, one hand still wrapped around the microphone while her carefully constructed expression slowly cracked apart. Ethan looked at me like he no longer recognized the woman standing in front of him. Perhaps he never really had. I picked up my napkin calmly and placed it beside the untouched dessert plate before sitting back down. Claire reached for her water glass with trembling fingers. Across the room, whispers had already begun spreading quietly between tables. Vanessa finally recovered enough to force a strained laugh into the microphone. "Margaret has always had quite a sense of humor," she said weakly. Nobody laughed with her. Not a single person. One by one, people began looking away from Vanessa instead of toward her. It was subtle. Tiny shifts in posture. Avoided eye contact. The slow social retreat that happens when polished masks suddenly slip in public. The rest of the evening unraveled quietly after that. Conversations became shorter. Guests left earlier than planned. Several women from the fundraising committee hugged me tightly before leaving without saying much to Vanessa at all. By the time the ballroom emptied, only 4 people remained inside. Me, Ethan, Vanessa, Claire. The candles had nearly burned down to nothing. Staff members quietly cleared dishes around us while soft instrumental music played overhead again, as if the room itself was trying to recover from embarrassment. Vanessa stood near the bar with her arms folded tightly across her chest. Her face had hardened completely now that the audience was gone. "I cannot believe you humiliated me like that," she said coldly. Humiliated. The word almost impressed me. Not ashamed of her behavior. Ashamed of exposure. Ethan rubbed one hand over his face wearily. "Mom, what was that supposed to accomplish?" I looked at him quietly across the dim ballroom. "You heard your wife mocking my illness," I answered calmly. "More than once." Ethan immediately glanced toward Vanessa before responding. People joke sometimes when situations are uncomfortable. Uncomfortable. I stared at him in complete silence for several seconds. Then I realized something painful but freeing at the same time. Ethan had not become cruel. He had simply become weak enough to stand beside cruelty without resisting it. Vanessa stepped closer toward our table in sharp, expensive heels. "After everything I have done for you these past months, this is how you repay me?" I almost laughed then. Not loudly. Just softly enough to surprise even myself. "You did not care for me, Vanessa," I said evenly. "You curated me." Her face paled instantly. Claire looked down into her lap to hide a smile. Vanessa opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, another voice interrupted from behind us. "Actually, Margaret handled herself with remarkable restraint tonight." Harold. Bennett stepped into the ballroom carrying a dark leather briefcase beneath one arm. Vanessa's expression shifted immediately from anger to confusion. Ethan straightened in his chair. "Harold." Harold nodded politely toward him before turning his attention to me. "I apologize for interrupting your evening, Margaret, but since everyone is already gathered, I thought it would be wise to finalize a few urgent matters in person." Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly. "What urgent matters?" Harold calmly placed the briefcase on the table and removed several folders. The soft sound of paper sliding against polished wood suddenly seemed louder than the music overhead. Ethan frowned. "Mom." I folded my hands carefully in my lap and looked directly at my son for the first time all evening. "Your father spent 41 years building a life for this family," I said quietly. "Tonight, I decided who deserves to inherit it." Vanessa's breathing visibly changed. Small. Quicker now. Harold opened the first folder slowly, while candlelight flickered across the gold lettering on the cover. "Whitmore Family Trust Revision." The ballroom became so quiet that I could hear the soft clinking of dishes from the kitchen behind the double doors. Harold adjusted his glasses calmly and opened the trust documents while Vanessa stood frozen beside the table. Ethan looked pale beneath the dim candlelight. For the first time all evening, nobody seemed interested in appearances anymore. Harold's voice remained professional and steady as he began reading the revisions aloud. Effective immediately, Margaret Whitmore retains sole authority over all property, investments, medical directives, and financial decisions regarding the Whitmore estate. Vanessa blinked rapidly. Ethan leaned forward in confusion. Harold continued without emotion. In addition, the residence on Willow Creek Road and the Bar Harbor property will transfer upon Margaret Whitmore's passing to the Whitmore Cancer Support Foundation recently established in honor of Richard Whitmore. Vanessa's face lost all remaining color. "What?" she whispered sharply. Harold calmly turned another page. Furthermore, Ethan Whitmore has been removed as co-manager of the estate due to concerns regarding undue influence and failure to protect the interests of the primary beneficiary. Ethan stared at me in complete disbelief. "Mom, you cannot be serious." I looked at him quietly across the table. "I have never been more serious in my life." Vanessa stepped forward suddenly, her voice rising for the first time since Harold arrived. "This is insane. You are punishing us because of one misunderstanding." Harold closed the folder slowly before answering her himself. "This decision was made after substantial legal review and personal testimony." Vanessa looked as though the room had tilted beneath her feet. All evening she had expected sympathy, admiration, control. She never expected consequences. Ethan rubbed both hands across his face before looking toward me again. "You are giving everything away?" His voice sounded smaller now, younger somehow. I folded my napkin carefully beside my empty plate. "No," I answered softly. "I am giving it somewhere safe." Vanessa laughed bitterly beneath her breath. "Unbelievable." Then she made the mistake of speaking again. "After everything we sacrificed taking care of you." The sentence hung unfinished in the air because even she realized too late how it sounded. Sacrificed. As though kindness had always been transactional. As though my illness had become labor they expected payment for. Claire slowly stood from her chair beside me and picked up her purse. "I think that word explains everything perfectly," she said calmly. Vanessa turned toward her furiously, but Claire no longer looked intimidated. None of them did anymore. The masks had finally slipped too far to recover. Harold packed the documents neatly back into his briefcase while staff members quietly cleared the remaining glasses around us, pretending not to overhear. I rose slowly from my chair and reached for my coat. Ethan immediately stood. "Mom, please," he said quietly. "Can we talk about this privately?" I looked at my son for a long moment beneath the dim ballroom lights. I still loved him. That was the tragedy of it all. Love does not disappear simply because disappointment arrives. But love also does not excuse betrayal forever. "We are talking now," I answered gently. "For the first time in a very long time, we are finally being honest." Neither Ethan nor Vanessa followed me as I walked toward the ballroom exit beside Claire. Outside, the night air felt cool and clean against my bare scalp. The parking lot shimmered softly beneath rows of golden lights while distant crickets hummed through the darkness near the golf course. Claire squeezed my arm gently as we reached the car. "How do you feel?" she asked quietly. I paused before answering. For months, every person around me focused on what cancer had taken away. My strength, my beauty, my certainty. But standing there beneath the open Connecticut sky without a wig, without fear, without the need to protect anyone else's comfort anymore, I realized something unexpected. I did not feel diminished at all. I felt visible. For the first time in years, I finally recognized the woman staring back at me in the car window. And she looked nothing like someone waiting to disappear.